All the political footballs on this show are fully inflated. I'm Charlie Sykes. Sunday Insight starts right now. Good morning and welcome to Sunday Insight. In the week that was a tragic random shooting leaves 4 dead in Menasha. Police say they have identified the remains of Kelly Dwyer, who was 27 years old when she was reported missing in October 2013. Police marked the 6-month anniversary of the shooting of 5-year-old Layla Peterson by offering an additional $25,000 reward for information. Ben Carson, Carly Fiorina, and Mike Huckabee all get into the presidential race. An NFL report says that, yeah, Tom Brady and the Patriots cheated by deflating those footballs and lied about it. The Brewers fire manager Ron Renicky and replace him with hometown favorite Craig Counsell, and they become the first Major League Baseball team to lose 20 games. But we start with Wisconsin state budget. Legislators had hoped to get some good news last week, new revenue that would help them avoid some tough choices and painful cuts. But the Legislative Fiscal Bureau said that it was sticking with its earlier estimate. There would be no additional money coming in, no tax windfall. Republicans moved quickly to promise to restore cuts to K-12 education, but the prospects for the UW system, the transportation budget, and for a new Bucks Arena were a lot less clear. Joining me on our panel this morning, defense attorney Dan Adams, the managing editor of RightWisconsin.com, Colin Roth, political strategist Lynn DeBruin, and media trackers Brian Sikma. So, Colin, who are the biggest winners and losers in the budget this week?
Well, the big loser has to be the UW system, who is going to have to swallow that big $300 million cut without getting the autonomy or the tools to really deal with it that was originally in the budget proposal. Winners look to be K-12 education, although they're going to figure out where that money comes from due to some little gimmicks.
Yeah, a little bit of moving stuff around.
Yeah.
I'm still unclear what's going to happen with the transportation budget, because Governor Walker said this week that he was not going to be in favor of raising the vehicle registration fee. So where does the revenue come from? You've had members of the legislature say they don't want to bond that much.
Yeah, the bonding issue is a big one for conservatives, and you don't want to. The gas tax is there's lots of rumbles about the gas tax, but it's hard to see that going through right now.
Biggest winners and losers. And where does the Bucks Arena come into all of this?
I don't know where the Bucks Arena is. It's been another slow week, which I'm optimistic means that they're working on an actual final deal. I know the county executive floated a balloon that didn't go very far this week. But the real winner...
Higher sales taxes.
The winner of the week, or I guess of the budget in total, are the road builders. I mean, no matter how bad the fiscal constraints of this state get, the road builders always seem to be on top, and we are borrowing more and more money, and we're paying more of the actual transportation budget for a debt service on our roads than ever before.
Do you know why you are completely wrong about that?
Tell me, Charlie.
Because you're not. He's not wrong about that, is he?
No, that's the unfortunate part about it. I mean, transportation is a big part of Wisconsin. We need it for our industry. We have a lot of manufacturing here. Our roads take a terrible beating in the wintertime. But it would be nice if legislators would find a way to fund road construction projects without having to bond so much. I think the winners here could be taxpayers, because there was kind of that hope that going into this session we could kind of put a budget proposal out there that was still bigger than the last budget, but revenues would be growing, and that would kind of carry us through. By facing some of these tough choices, legislators have a chance now to start reprioritizing things. It's not going to be easy for the politicians. I do think, though, it could benefit taxpayers.
You used to be the finance committee chairman for the county board. You know what tough budgets look like.
Well, and remember, a year ago, there was a $1 billion surplus, and that was spent on reducing taxes, which most of the Republicans have said they're going to keep in, and Walker has too. But, some of the moderate losses, I think, are ones that people don't realize. First of all, the state is going to remove all of its funding for our park system, which would make us the only state in the country with a park system funded entirely by fees that might actually survive. Everyone else has never survived. There's major cuts to the conservation project, which Republicans back in October said you need to keep because it keeps 185,000 tourism jobs. There's also cuts to 16 out of the 17 community health centers, some $28 million in cuts, which will send thousands of patients to ER rooms. So there's lots of those middle-level cuts that are major.
There are, and I think, look, the state government's too bloated, and I think we can cut money. But on the other hand, there are a lot of politically difficult, problematic cuts that are going to be made, which again goes back to the question of, are you going to cut UW? Are you going to cut all these other programs at the same time you're coming up with new money for the Bucks Arena? And that's why I think I have the different approach than you do, Dan, that every week that goes by without progress, I think, is somewhat negative. I thought it was interesting that Governor Walker said that in the day after these revenue numbers came in, said, well, you know, the Bucks Arena is going to have to, you know, move to the back burner. He later said more positive things. But it is difficult taking your castor oil in all of these other areas when you have something like that. But, you know, in terms of the transportation budget, I don't know how they square this circle right now. Unless they are prepared to delay major projects, cut some spending. They're not going to raise the gasoline tax. Some of the fees are off the table. And I don't know that anybody in Madison right now has an answer for this.
Well, I think you're right, Charlie. And I think that's why the prevailing wage fight is going to play into this a little bit. And here's another thing. Federal Davis-Bacon applies to the state transportation fund because we have federal funds that come in and also mix with state funds. If there was an interesting innovative solution out there, it could involve splitting the state transportation fund and the federal transportation fund, segregating them to reduce the cost even by a few percentage points would actually stretch those transportation dollars.
I think you're going to see that. So what is your glass half full? What is your glass half empty this week? Let's go around the table. Dan Adams, you're first.
My glass is half full because Carmen High School of Science and Technology, a charter school, was named Wisconsin's most challenging high school by the Washington Post. Last year, 97% of graduating seniors passed at least one AP exam. By the way, 90% of Carmen students qualify for free or reduced lunch. My glass is half empty because the Milwaukee School Board is actively and consistently undermining high-performing charter schools' ability to serve more kids. Sad and maddening.
Colin Roth.
My glass is half full because Indiana took the initiative to repeal their prevailing wage last week. It's half empty because the effort to repeal the wage in Wisconsin keeps running into roadblocks.
Linda Bruin.
Well, my glass is half full because the FBI's monitoring of Twitter messages has helped them arrest 39 would-be terrorists in 13 states. But my glass is half empty because they have the ongoing task of monitoring more than 5,000 Americans who follow radical Twitter accounts.
Brian Sickma.
Well, my glass is half full because the national unemployment rate dropped last month to 5.4%, the lowest since early 2008. But my glass is half empty because 93.2 million Americans, more than ever before, aren't even participating in the workforce.
Well, my glass is half full because CNN pundit Sally Cohn forgot her purse, but a kindly attendant on the subway was kind enough to let her ride anyway. It's half empty because she thanked him by calling him a racist, tweeting that it was an example of white privilege. Nice. Next on Sunday Insight, a state Senate committee rejects a bill to repeal prevailing wage. So what happens next? Indiana became the latest state to repeal its so-called prevailing wage law, but attempts falter in Wisconsin. Critics of the Depression-era law say that it artificially inflates the cost of public projects by forcing taxpayers to pay union-level wages. One estimate from the nonpartisan Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance says that the prevailing wage requirement costs Wisconsin taxpayers an additional $200 to $300 million a year. Supporters of the law, including unions and some contractors, say the law guarantees fair pay. Well, last week, an effort to repeal that law for state and local governments was defeated in a state Senate committee on a 3-2 vote, when Republican Howard Markline sided with Democrats. Supporters vow to keep pushing the measure, especially in light of the new tight budget numbers. What happens now? Is the repeal dead, Brian Sickman?
Absolutely not, Charlie, and for the very reason you just mentioned, the fact that the new revenue numbers coming in show that there is no additional way to fund this budget, and so they're going to have to look for ways to save money. This is a fairly easy way to save money when you look at it. Now, if you're looking at the political side and all the campaign contributions that have come to Republicans, that's not easy. But if you look at the fact that you can still stretch those dollars further by repealing unnecessary overhead costs, this is the way to go about doing it. You have Indiana doing it. You have Wisconsin out there now.
Michigan is now
Michigan has done it. We've had other states that have already made steps towards repealing their common construction wage, their prevailing wages, they call it in other states. This is something that has to get done if they're going to start achieving some cost savings.
But as Dan Adams pointed out in the last segment, it does appear the road builder lobby appears to be the one sacrosanct special interest in Madison.
Well, it's horizontal construction and vertical construction. Starting tomorrow, media trackers and some other conservative groups are going to start rolling out some specific examples so people can see how even private roads in Wisconsin are subject to the prevailing wage and how this is something that really increases the cost of road construction across the state.
Okay, Linda Brown.
Well, I don't think it's dead yet, but for a very different reason. Not a philosophical one, but a political one. Senator Nass is a new senator. He's the sponsor in the Senate. And in the Assembly, when he's an assemblyman, he was known for not voting for budgets. And he has basically threatened not to vote for this coming budget if he doesn't get what he wants, either in a complete repeal or in some amended form. if the Republicans can't afford to lose more than 2 votes on the budget.
Right,
so the leadership has to decide, are they going to give in to this guy and allow him to dictate this or not?
You have to figure out how you afford this budget unless you do. I mean, when you have a budget this tight, to not take advantage of a savings.
If you accepted $385 million of Medicaid funds, you'd have that problem covered.
Let me give some unsolicited advice to the conservatives on the panel. If you want prevailing wage to be repealed, just get a push poll from Iowa GOP caucus voters that says we want Wisconsin's prevailing wage repealed. Scott Walker will drive back from Des Moines, and he'll be pushing this thing all throughout the state.
Okay, you do raise an interesting question because, Colin, you had a piece up on Right Wisconsin on Friday saying, look, you have Governor Walker's running around the country talking about, he's the union slayer, he's running on Act 10, and yet here is your big, bold idea that he's not leading on right now.
Yeah, this is the one big, bold idea that Scott Walker won't champion, and it's frustrating for a lot of conservatives, especially when this is such an obvious win for taxpayers. And a lot of us see the same playbook playing out that happened with Right to Work. Now he's championed Right to Work nationally. He's talking about doing it as a nationwide federal law if he were president, which is kind of amazing to us who remember him calling it a distraction. I'd like to see him engage on the issue.
Yeah. Okay, now do you know why you're wrong about Senator Nass and the vote in the Senate?
No.
You're not. Because it is interesting. When you have this massive transportation budget that is clearly, that you are either going to have to borrow for it or you're going to have to raise the fees. I could certainly see 3 senators saying, unless you have prevailing wage, we're not going to vote for it. It is not a fiscally conservative budget to vote for that transportation package, which is ginormous, without prevailing wage. And so if you have Steve Nass, maybe you have Dewey Strobel and one other senator, then they have to make a decision what they're going to do on that. And I do think that that's a possibility. Now, you may not want to hear it, but we will tell you anyway. Let's hand out some unsolicited advice. Dan Adams, you're first.
My advice, if you read one thing this week, read Milwaukee Circuit Court Judge David Borowski's op-ed from last week's Journal Sentinel. In it, Borowski articulates what we all know, that there are 0 excuses for committing reprehensible acts of violence.
Colin Roth.
My unsolicited advice is for Republicans in Madison to remember Act 10. It was divisive, it was tough, and it was the right thing to do. Voters and taxpayers will reward you for doing the right thing.
Linda Bruin.
It would be so refreshing if some professional athlete caught up in a scandal just told the truth. So my advice is to Tom Brady, the Patriots quarterback caught up in the Deflategate scandal. Be a real role model and tell the truth.
Brian Sickma.
Well, my unsolicited advice is for Governor Mike Huckabee and Dr. Ben Carson. Neither of you have coherent conservative governing philosophies, and both of you should drop out of the GOP presidential primary.
Whoa. Well, my unsolicited advice is to legislative Republicans. Remember when you first got into politics, you knew that someday you would face that moment that would define who you really are. Would you do the right thing or the safe thing? Would you stand up for taxpayers or for the special interests? This vote on prevailing wage is that moment. Do the right thing. Still ahead on Sunday Insight, the terror attack in Texas. What are the limits of free speech? Did the organizers of the art show ask for it? A terrorist attack in Texas sets off a debate on the limits of free speech. 2 gunmen were killed in Garland, Texas, after they attacked a center that was displaying cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. Critics ripped the art show as offensive and needlessly provocative, but should the victims be blamed for the attacks by the jihadists? Should we censor things that terrorists object to because they might kill people? And if we do, where does that leave free speech, Dan Adams?
In a sorry state. Listen, I was an exchange student in Istanbul, Turkey when I was in high school.
Really?
I called a Muslim woman mom for 11 months, and I revere that religion. But, here in America, we revere absolute First Amendment right, and that right includes the right to offend. And violence is never okay, so I'm going to push back against anyone who says that it was way too provocative. In the United States, you can be as provocative as you want.
Linda Bruin.
Well, the only part where I think there's a distinction here is that the woman that paid for the space, the center administration didn't have any choice. She would have taken them to court and lost if they had denied her the ability to rent this spot. The problem is Pamela Geller is the head of one of the most extremist hate groups in the United States, and she deliberately did this to be provocative. The local Muslim leadership, you will notice there wasn't a single Muslim protest there. They decided not to because they didn't want to give her the airtime. The problem is we had a couple terrorists who decided they were going to go after her. And frankly, so I wish there was some ability to parse out some culpability by somebody who's deliberately trying to set up and put Americans' lives at risk.
Okay.
On the other hand, you can't.
She is not responsible for putting American lives at risk. It is the terrorists, because and we would not be having the same argument, particularly hearing the same arguments from the people who are attacking the show, if in fact she had been making fun of the Book of Mormon, or if she'd been making fun of the Catholic Church, or if she had been displaying a crucifix in urine, as we all know, because liberals lectured us about our need to be tolerant. And I do think that there's a fundamental principle here. I think the scarier part of that story, though, is that Homeland Security knew these guys, were watching these guys, and they were still not able to stop that attack.
Yeah, we hear all about the importance of the Patriot Act and the NSA bulk collection of surveillance and various things, and always after every single one of these events, whether it's Boston or whether it's Garland, Texas, these guys are always on a watch list, these guys are always known about, and somehow these attacks never get caught.
Yeah, the First Amendment doesn't come with a caveat that says it doesn't apply to people who have ridiculous points of view. And I think that the entire event in Texas was ridiculous, and there was no point to it that was valuable or meaningful to the discussion, but nevertheless, they did have a First Amendment right to participate in that speech, and you wouldn't, as you point out, Charlie, you wouldn't be hearing about this if it was a anti-Christian event or an anti-Mormon event.
Let's be more direct about it. Does the First Amendment protect hate speech?
I think it does, unless it incites violence. And my only concern here is that she showed no responsibility. She was so irresponsible. She did it deliberately to provoke. And that's the part that's frustrating, because there were innocent people there who could have died as a result of this.
But not because of what she did, but because of what the terrorists did.
I know. And their culpability doesn't get diminished because I think that she made an irresponsible choice. I want to be clear about that. You're all right about free speech, but it is very frustrating to know there's people out there like her.
Well, it is. But you know what? That's part of being an American. That's part of that is part of the the debate that we have, and that how amazing it is that we have a First Amendment that allows bizarre people to say offensive, ridiculous things. What is it you don't get this week? Let's go around the table. Dan Adams, you're first.
I don't get why Wisconsin Democrats still treat the AFSCME union as a sacred cow. Many AFSCME positions clearly undercut Democrats' good government ideals. Membership of the union is 1/3 of what it was in 2010. In short, it's a paper tiger.
Colin Roth.
What I don't get is how the First Amendment's protection of free speech became somehow controversial and unpalatable to so many in the media who depend on the very First Amendment for their livelihood.
Linda Bruin.
Well, what I don't get is why it took a newspaper story to get different departments within the city of Milwaukee and the county sheriff's office to communicate with each other so that property tax bills on foreclosed properties go to the correct owners. This wasn't a new problem, yet no one did anything about it until the article.
Brian Sickma.
What I don't get is why the pro-prevailing wage group Protect American Jobs is running an ad with racial overtones, claiming that a repeal of prevailing wage may allow immigrant workers to work on Wisconsin job sites. If prevailing wage advocates want to make the law a racial barrier to the workplace, well, that's just another reason to repeal it.
Well, I talked about this on my radio show on Friday. I am amazed that dad in the horrific Menasha shooting, Jonathan Stoffel, could say, forgive the shooter with his last breath. Now, he's a better man than I am, because I just don't think that I'd be able to do that. Next on Sunday Inside, our panel picks the winners and losers of the week. But first, here's your morning news update. It is time for our panel to pick the winners and losers of the week. Dan Adams, you're first.
My winner, Brian Darrow, who's grabbed the momentum for the special election for Waukesha State Senate seat. As a Democrat, I just don't have a dog in this race, but as a political observer, it's clear the outsider Darrow is now the guy to beat. My loser, Milwaukee Alderman Bob Bauman, who is attempting to block an immigrant-owned downtown Dunkin' Donuts from operating at night, claiming the coffee shop attracts panhandlers. Alder Bauman should be embarrassed by his bullying of this small business.
Colin Roth.
My winner this week is Senator Steve Nass, who used his committee for a public hearing on prevailing wage. Even though the bill failed in committee, the testimony from local officials and small contractors was enlightening to the importance of repeal. My loser is the First Amendment. From Garland, Texas to college campuses, the right to speak freely is under assault from both bullets and bullies. If we don't renew our commitment to free speech, we just might lose it.
Linda Bruin.
Well, my winner is the Garland, Texas security officer whose heroism and skill stopped the terrorists from hurting anyone at the Art Show Center. It's astonishing that he was able to stop 2 men in body armor carrying assault rifles with only his service pistol. My loser is Milwaukee County Executive Chris Abley's idea to help finance a new arena by raising the county food and beverage tax. This regressive tax would disproportionately tax the middle class and poor to subsidize an arena owned by mega millionaires and games mostly attended by the wealthy. Overtaxing the poor and middle class to fund the rich is the worst idea yet for financing a new arena.
Brian Sikma.
Well, my winner this week is former GOP Speaker John Garland, who now works on behalf of big labor and special interest groups looking to stick it to taxpayers. Congratulations on temporarily stalling a bill that would save Wisconsin taxpayers up to $300 million a year. It's good to see government still works for well-compensated insiders. My losers this week is journalist Katie Couric, who asked GOP presidential candidate Carly Fiorina how she could say, quote, unkind things about Hillary Clinton. Well, Katie, once upon a time, the media used to exercise a skepticism of those in power. It used to be dedicated to holding those in power accountable, and when you don't do your job, don't get upset when other people help you out.
Well, the New England Patriots and their star quarterback Tom Brady cheated. Then they lied about it. Now, they may be Super Bowl champs, but that makes them world-class losers. My winner, Craig Counsell, local boy made good, a great baseball player and a class act, and one of us. Now just go win some games. Thanks for joining us. Join for my radio show on Monday morning. It's on News Radio 620 WTMJ from 8:30 until noon. Have a great week, and remember, just to give your mom a hug. It is Mother's Day. You guys got them something, right? You got the flowers and everything. You take care of the mother thing, you know.